Hi everyone, welcome back to Supply Chain 360. I'm Ralph Leindecker. In the last episode, we talked about Davos as a live demonstration of great power politics and the squeeze on middle powers. Today, I want to take the next step. Because since Davos, the question is no longer what leaders said. The question is what those signals now mean for the physical infrastructure of global supply chains. And the word I want to focus on is choke points. Not abstract geopolitics, not big theory, choke points. Because when power politics starts to reshape shipping lanes, energy corridors, and trade rules, supply chains don't experience that as a speech. They experience it as a route that stops working, a lead time that becomes unreliable, a fuel cost that jumps, or a supplier ecosystem that suddenly becomes less stable than it looked on paper. That's where strategy turns into operations. Let's start with the Red Sea and Suez. Back in January, there was a brief sense that the system might be moving back toward normal. Maersk resumed cautious transits through the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb as the Gaza ceasefire held. And by early February, Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd had restarted some services through the corridor. For a moment, it looked like one of the world's most important shipping routes was moving from disrupted back toward fragile but usable. And that matters, because when Suez works, Asia-Europe lead times shorten, freight capacity effectively comes back into the system, and the pressure on rates eases. But what the last weeks also showed is how unstable that recovery really is. As conflict escalated around Iran, the Strait of Hormuz moved into focus again. The US-Israeli war on Iran had effectively shut Hormuz for periods, with major producers cutting output because they could not ship normally. LNG cargoes are being diverted towards Asia, and both Asia and Europe are exposed if Hormuz stays constrained. So what looked like a logistics story about one route reopening quickly became an energy and shipping story about another route becoming critical. And this is the first big lesson for supply chain leaders. A choke point is never just a local problem. The Red Sea is not only about containers. Hormuz is not only about oil. Once one of these corridors moves, the effect cascades through fuel prices, carrier behavior, insurance scheduling, and the availability of industrial inputs that sit behind much more than transportation. If you work in pharma, that matters more than many people think. Yes, pharma is not oil. And yes, most pharma leaders will say, we don't ship through conflict zones if we can avoid it. But that's not the point. The point is that pharma relies on systems that rely on choke points. APIs and intermediates sit inside chemical and energy-intensive ecosystems. Cold chain performance depends on stable lanes and predictable handovers. Packaging devices, sensors, and equipment often depend on broader manufacturing and electronics networks that feel energy and freight disruption before your dashboard does. So even when your carton of medicine is not physically moving through Hormuz, your cost base, your supplier stability, and your replenishment reliability may still be shaped by it. Now add Taiwan to the picture. Taiwan is a different kind of choke point. Not a narrow sea lane in the same way, but a strategic node for semiconductors, electronics, and high-end industrial capability. And it's still sitting there in the background. Not in open war, but not in a calm state either. Taiwan's parliament has now authorized stalled US arms deals worth around $9 billion, while discussions continue around further defense packages. For supply chain leaders, Taiwan is the perfect example of a low probability, very high impact risk. You don't redesign your whole network every week because of it, but you absolutely should know which parts of your system would feel it first. Would it hit your equipment suppliers, your devices business, your contract manufacturing base, your data and automation infrastructure? Again, this is why I like the word choke point. It forces you to ask, Where does this system narrow? Where do many flows depend on one corridor, one technology source, one political permission structure? And then there is the tariff layer. Since Davos, even tariff governance itself has become unstable. There are new legal challenges from US states and businesses against President Trump's latest tariffs, after the Supreme Court had already ruled that emergency powers law did not authorize the previous tariff design. In other words, tariffs are still being used aggressively, but the legal basis around them is also moving. That matters because it means companies are not only planning around tariffs, they are planning around uncertainty about tariffs. And from an executive judgment point of view, that's very different. A stable bad rule is easier to manage than an unstable ruled set. So what do you do with all of this? I think there are 3 practical questions leaders should ask right now. First, which choke points do we rely on without really admitting it? Not just routes, also energy systems, customs regimes, data centers, banks, cloud providers, and regulatory pathways. Second, if one of those choke points becomes unreliable, what breaks first? Is it lead time, cost, product allocation, quality risk, working capital, compliance? And third, which levers do we actually control before the next disruption shows up? That could be a second route, a different inventory posture, a different sourcing mix, faster supplier qualification, more flexibility in contracts, or simply clearer decision rights so that when a lane becomes unstable, you don't lose 10 days in internal escalation. This is the deeper point I want to leave you with. After Davos, the world did not become more predictable. It became more explicit. The speeches told us that power politics is back in the open. The weeks since then have shown us what that means in real networks. Choke points matter again, maybe more than ever. And if you're running a supply chain in pharma, healthcare, or any other major industry, the question is no longer whether geopolitics is relevant. The question is whether you know where your choke points are and whether you've already decided what you will do when one of them narrows, slows, or shuts. Because in the Barney world, resilience doesn't start with slogans. It starts with knowing where the system can choke. Thanks for listening. I'm Ralph Leindecker, and this was Supply Chain 360.